Drake 63 here again today, and today we're going to talk about revolvers. Specifically going to talk about what to look for when you're purchasing a revolver. We're going to get into some terminology and some things that I think are misnomers in terms of how they're supposed to operate, what makes for a good revolver, a bad revolver, what are some things such as lockup and end play. So we're going to get into those things and talk about them a little bit. And mostly the purpose of this video is to help out guys who don't know a lot about revolvers, learn a little bit more, maybe avoid some mistakes of buying the wrong revolver or paying too much for a revolver, and more specifically just familiarize you with the workings of revolvers. We're going to look at everything from an 1873 design, such as this, the good old single action, through modern day design such as this, which is a 357 Magnum pocket carry gun from Smith & Wesson, and everything in between. So going to share a few of my experiences and some things I've learned, and I'm hoping that it will be of use to you as you think about perhaps getting into the revolver game, or maybe just give you some ideas in case you already are. As always, guys, if you see something in this video that doesn't agree with you, feel free to let me know in the comments, and we'd obviously like to know your thoughts and your feedback. Okay, the first thing I want to show you today is the proper way to check for sloppiness, play, cylinder play, whatever you want to call it, in your cylinder. Okay, a lot of guys think that what you're supposed to do is see if it wiggles. And just about every revolver out there is going to have some wiggle. However, the proper way to do it is to pull the hammer back, depress the trigger, and release the hammer. At that point, it's what's considered locked up. At that point, can you move the cylinder? And one thing that's important to know, it's okay to have some play. In fact, most modern revolvers are supposed to have just a little bit. Okay, why is that important? Well, let's look at a couple parts here. First of all, this right here is what's called the forcing cone, and what it is it's part of the barrel. It runs to the end. This forcing cone lines up with each of these chambers in the cylinder. So each one of these is going to be a little bit different. So you want to check each one of them. Okay. So you'll notice that from one to the next there'll be some differences. And why is that? Well, if you look right here on the cylinder, you'll see that there is an indentation, and that is where this guy right here on the bottom grabs it. Okay, so as your gun wears, or if it's not properly manufactured, you're going to see that one cylinder to the next might be different, and you'll get a little bit of a different lockup. And that could be a lot of things, but typically it's just manufacturing. Okay, that's why you'll hear comments such as, hey, this particular cylinder shoots better than the others. Again, why is this important? This needs to line up with that forcing cone. Okay, if it doesn't line up properly, what you're going to get is a bunch of debris flying out the side, or what's called shaving. When you hear somebody reference the term shaving, what they're talking about is the bullet itself is not lining up with this forcing cone, so part of the bullet is glancing off of the edge as opposed to going straight down the tube as it's supposed to, straight down the barrel. Okay, so all firearms are supposed to have a little. In a lot of cases, you're not going to know whether or not that it's actually good from a play standpoint unless you fire it. So, whenever you can fire a firearm, that's great. But it's just important to realize this is good lockup. Okay, this is good lockup. Okay, compare that to, say, this older Chief Special. Okay, this is in .38 Special, Smith & Wesson. same thing. A lot less play than that other one. This firearm has not been shot a lot, but it also locks up tighter. Now, here's a brand new Smith & Wesson, and you'll see right off the bat, it's got a little bit of play. And again, when people think these things are supposed to lock up completely tight with absolutely no play at all, that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. Just for grins, let's compare to this, which is a nicely tuned Uberti. This is imported by Taylor's. It's called the Smoke Wagon. This is the classic design in .357 Magnum of the original Colt, which was a .45 caliber Colt chambering. But you'll see here that you've got some movement, and again, that's just going to happen. Okay, what's important is does it shave your bullets? And I have not had that issue with any of these firearms that we're showing you today, so that's a good thing. If it's too much, and fortunately I don't have an example of really bad, but if it's too much, you're going to end up with a situation where you're not going to be happy with the performance of your firearm. You're going to have pieces of metal flying out sideways when you go to the range and so forth, and the performance and accuracy are going to probably be affected in a negative way. So that's one aspect you want to look at. And again, most modern revolvers are meant to have some degree of a play or wiggle with that. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is end play, and that is how much, if any, does this cylinder go back and forth, and you need to have a cylinder gap that is within specification for each firearm, and each firearm might be a little bit different. So what does that mean, end play? Well, back and forth movement, okay? And typically where that occurs is in a bushing, and let me see if I can show you that. Right here, next to my finger, you'll see the cylinder going back and forth with the ejector rod, okay? And that's held to this piece right here, which is called the crane, and that's what attaches and swings out your cylinder. Now, you'll notice that that still exists to a degree right here, okay? But is it an acceptable degree? Well, there's only one way to really find that out. But one thing that I do want to point out, and I've been specifically instructed by 2 different gunsmiths on this, so I'm feeling pretty good about this being good information, guys. Whereas you wanted to press the hammer holding down on the trigger to check for lockup, in terms of end play, you don't. You leave the hammer down, and that's how you check. And we're going to show you how we check that right now. Okay, before anybody gets too excited about what I'm doing here with this vise and these beautiful revolvers, all I'm doing is tightening enough just to hold it steady so that we can show you this feeler gauge test. And you'll notice that I've got a couple different layers of leather here, prevent any kind of scratching at all. So a gap measuring device. This is basically what you get at AutoZone or any auto parts store to check spark plug gaps, and also works really well for checking the gaps between your cylinder and your forcing cone. Okay, so what we're going to check is this gap, and you kind of see it appear in the daylight right here. We're going to check this gap between the end of the cylinder and the forcing cone. And the reason that we want to do 2 measurements is we want to see when it's slid all the way forward what the gap is, and when it's all the way back. This is a comparison. Let's try .004. .008 is a snug fit, so I want to see what happens with .009. And that's, I really got to force that in there. So between .009 and .008 is where this is. So I wanted to make sure I had a proper reading on this, and so from the best I can tell, the variance on this particular cylinder on in-play is between .004 and .0075. So .008's too much, .007's just barely the right size. So I'm going to say that the variance on this is between 3 and 3.5 100ths. Am I going to worry about that? Probably not. Would I worry about that if I was planning on putting many rounds on this and wanted this to be a shooter that I shot forever? I might. We will do a little bit of research, though, and talk to Colt and see what their stance is, but I've just heard that they're not going to work on these firearms anymore. And I don't know how much money I want to pay. If all they're going to do is drop a bushing in on that cylinder, I can do that work myself. So we'll see. Okay, so for purposes of comparison, we had this brand new Smith & Wesson come in at .007 and no end play whatsoever. This is a Smith & Wesson model 28-2 from the 80s. And it's coming in at .008, and again, very little end play. My forward measurement .008, and I can't even get to .009. So you're talking less than 100. How does that compare to something like this? This Uberti comes in at .007. Lastly, we're going to check out this Chief Special. .005 for the Chief Special. So it fits up there pretty snugly. But you can see what I've got right there. And, you know, there is that option of putting a bushing on there. And Larry Potterfield from Midway USA does a series of videos on repairs like this. And it might be something that we'll look at. I'm probably not going to run 1,000 rounds through this firearm anytime soon, but I'm pretty sure that if I do, I'm just going to increase that. That's my guess. Whereas here on this Smith & Wesson, you know, you've got no end play. So, you know, maybe once a year we measure that. I'm not going to shoot this a lot because this is not a comfortable 357 to shoot for target. This is a tool. This is a self-defense tool. But here, as you see here, where you have absolutely no cylinder play on a used, you know, we're looking at a 38-year-old firearm, used firearm. It's made in 1980, and it doesn't have any end play. No measurable to speak of, and your gaps and tolerances are good. So good on you, Smith & Wesson. So we like that. What about this Uberti? Well, this is a firearm that is new to me. And I imagine for my uses, shooting really dumbed down 38 special for cowboy action shooting, nothing's going to be an issue. However, if I wanted to start shooting full house 357 loads through this, it might be. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you to check your barrel and your bore. You want to make sure that it's not scratched, dinged up, or rusted. Best thing to do is bring along a light so you can check it out. I don't know how well you can see this. You can probably see this pretty well. But this barrel, where it screws onto the frame, is approximately 1 to 1.5 degrees off top dead center. Okay, and that's part of, you know, when you see guys talk about a pinned barrel being something that you want as opposed to the modern ones, well, that's one reason, is that it has a set position where it's going to go to be perfectly aligned. This is screwed on, so it has to do with where the threads are set and things of that nature. Now, if you look real close, you're going to see that that sight is just a tad off of being centered where it needs to be. Consequently, this firearm, which is brand new in 2018, shoots a little bit to the left. Some of you might be asking, well, heck, why don't you send it in to Smith and have them fix it? And I'll tell you why I'm not. It shoots fine. It's a short-range self-defense firearm. It functions great. It does what I need it to do. If it were a target firearm, something like that, I might be a little bit more inclined. And some of you out there just flat out would not accept that. And I understand that. You want your firearms to be perfect, especially if you're paying, $500-600 for a new one like this. I just want to point out, though, that this firearm functions great. It shoots well, and there's a real good chance you could send this off and it could come back and not shoot as good, but look good to the eye. But like I said, there's a slight imperfection on that, and that is something to keep in mind when you're looking at firearms. For example, you're not going to see that with this firearm. I don't know, you're probably not going to see anything with this firearm because it's black, but you'll see everything's perfectly aligned. But what that's called is clocked. This is called clocked. Another thing you might want to do is just make sure the trigger works the way it's supposed to. If they will let you dry fire this firearm, you should be able to see how it's going to function. Now, this particular one is a gate loading revolver. The cylinder comes out. It does not have a crane that swings out. And so, there's certain things that are factors for this that you won't see with these others, which are all double actions as well as single actions. But you can obviously get a feel for how the trigger's going to work. Some guys won't let you dry fire their firearm. I, for example, will not dry fire this Colt just because there's some question of whether or not I could get parts replaced at this point, or how difficult that'll be. So I would not dry fire this. And if someone were looking at it and said, hey, can I dry fire it? I would say no. Dry fire this thing all day long. Not a problem. And a firearm like this, you want to see how it's going to function. You want to see how it's going to stage. And with some muscle memory, you can get good at that. You also want to see how it fires in single action. It's not going to hurt this firearm to do that. Now, this one doesn't necessarily stage as much. Other term I've heard for that is how does it stack? But basically, as you're coming back in a double action pull, there's spots where it will come to a rest. You can almost feel a click on a lot of them. The bottom line is if the triggers don't work when you dry fire them, they're not gonna work. So that's one thing you want to look for. But like I said, there might be cases such as this. I wouldn't let anybody dry fire this. Let's talk about finish a little bit. This Chief Special is pretty. You can look at it and you can see your face in it almost. You could use it as a mirror. And taking a look at this all the way around, you'll see right here it's a little bit tarnished, and I've worked to shine that up right there, and I don't know if that's just a simple case of that's where maybe it went against a guy's ankle. A little bit of sweat has worked on that over time. But overall, this grades as a really nice finish. And some of the things you might want to look for, you're always going to get this cylinder ring. So guys that are worried about that, I think, are worrying about the wrong stuff. You're always going to get that to a degree. But, what are some characteristics? This particular one right here, a little bit of a scratch right there. Now, is that a big deal for me? No, not at all. Not at all. And of course, obviously with a new firearm, you're going to have expectations of pretty much perfection, not tool marks or things of that nature. This stainless, one of the things I really don't like about stainless is you do get these brush marks. You can buff it up real good. Looking at this 28-2, flawless finish. Flawless finish, a little bit greased up there, but it's a flawless finish with one exception that I noticed. It's right here. And I guess I'm going to guess right there that what happened with that, at one point in time, somebody dinged it up with something. Scratched it with a tool, maybe when they were futzing around with a screwdriver, something like that. And that's something else that you always want to look for, is look at the screws on the gun. Because if they're malformed, if the slots are bent up, that means somebody didn't know what they were doing, was working on it. Here's a real good example of that. That was not taken apart by a gunsmith. That's what a screw's supposed to look like. That's what a screw looks like when you use the wrong size or type screwdriver and you over torque it. Okay, was that enough to make me not buy this firearm? No. But these are the things to look for. Has Bubba been working on that firearm? Okay. Now here's a case of a firearm that this is from 1975, so it's got a few years. Sure, I'd love it if it had like a brand new Python finish or whatever, but these weren't finished like that to begin with. This is real typical on a revolver that's seen use. You get some holster wear right there where the barrel slides in and out of the holster. Maybe a scratch or a ding here or there. What I'm looking for more than anything else are signs of rust. And I see signs where you've got some deterioration of the finish a little bit. Also, it looks like maybe Bubba had a crack at that screw once. I'm not sure. But you look up at anything close, and you're gonna see some issues. I'm looking in the market for a 4-inch version of this firearm, and one of the ones I looked at recently in person, this whole top rib here was pitted, and I just really didn't like that. That really turned me off. But when you're looking at these firearms, you want to know what you're getting. Okay, this is wear. Okay. In other words, when I run my finger across this, I don't feel indentations like it's rusting out. This is wear, and so I need to keep this well lubricated. Same with this cylinder, okay? But this is definitely getting to be an older firearm. If I wanted to carry this in a holster, it's not going to wear very well for me. Just a little bit of oil right there. So these are the things you need to think about. What is your purpose and what is your use? Okay, I would not take this Colt Trooper and use it as an everyday carry gun, or you know, a truck gun or something like that. It's just too rare in today's world to want to do that. And but I do want to shoot it, of course. Comparing that, say, to this 28-2, this thing's built like a tank. I'm not really worried about preservation. A Model 27 maybe, yeah. But this thing I would definitely throw on my hip, carrying the console of my truck, whatever. It's got a finish which is just durable, matte finish. Not near as pretty as what this Colt was in its heyday. Not near as pretty as what this Model 36 is, or some of the newer stuff. Other things you might want to look for are modifications, and can you live with them or not. Now, this has clearly been modified. Somebody took some paint right here on the front sight to make it more visible. And they also painted the rear sight. Okay? That's not a problem for me, and it actually helps with shootability quite a bit. And if I wanted to take that off, I certainly can. Somebody does something that's permanent to it, though, and then that becomes more of an issue. So, you know, something to think about. If somebody had mounted some kind of optic on there or something and that left some marks or clamp marks or something like that, I'm going to look at that. But basically, with these firearms, you're wanting to make sure you understand how they work. You're wanting to make sure you know as much about them before you go look at them as you can. And you want to understand what's acceptable and what's not for things like lockup and cylinder play and why these things are important. Okay, well, we could get in definitely to a complete different video about what to look for in a single action, say, old Colt 1873 replica versus something that would be a duty police pistol from the 70s or 80s. We could look at those kind of things, and that's material for other videos. But then what I was hoping to do today more than anything was just kind of get into some terminology, expose you to some different things. This is by no means meant to be the definitive revolver video by any stretch. But like I said, I'd like to get some information out to the guys that are looking. Certain things that are going to be important, some things that guys talk about that aren't as important as you'd think. And most importantly, hey, what's the proper way to check for lockup, and what are you looking at when you're looking at end play? Because lockup and end play are the two things on a revolver that if you're a guy that's used to firing the semi-autos, it's all brand new stuff for you. It's stuff you've never worried about. And shooting your 1911 or your Glock or whatever you have, and all of a sudden here's this whole new set of things that you need to be thinking about before you buy a firearm. Sometimes you can get deals. Sometimes things are too good to be true. If you educate yourself, if you read, there's so much good information on the internet, specifically when you get into the world of revolvers, because it just tends to be a much more educated and mature crowd than you get with young guys that are arguing about Glock versus M&P in the semi-auto world. And again, I'm not meaning to insult any brands. I think you guys know I'm a big Glock guy, but seriously though, it's important to understand how these things function and make some good choices, because you could end up spending a lot of money on a revolver and get something that you're not happy with. So whether you're shooting for fun, some cowboy action type shooting, whether you're shooting for self-defense, which I think a revolver's a great choice for self-defense, by the way. Whatever you're doing, learn as much you can about your firearm, be proficient, practice, and support the NRA. This is Dr. Drake 63 saying thanks for watching. I hope you learned something today, and I'm looking forward to learning anything anybody wants to pass on in the comments section. Thanks.